I'm Evan B. Howard, and this is number 19 in our series of video lectures on the spirituality of Christian worship. Today's lecture is entitled Writing a Rule of Life, the Principal Work. Now, if you remember, in previous videos, we have introduced the whole concept to writing a rule of life, the life of worship, and we also presented my approach toward what I call the important preliminary work involved in writing a rule of life. So I'm assuming by now that perhaps you have sketched out some kind of a prologue for your own personal rule of life, a life of worship. You have articulated some kind of general vision of what's God's plan for the whole universe, and then you've worked your way down to a particular vision. Circumstances of life, roles in key relationships, enduring values, and your kind of charism in life, your gifts and desires, your own cutting edge spiritually in your relationship with God, and maybe you've ended with some kind of my personal relationship with God statement. Now, you don't have to have all of those factors, but the idea was that a prologue leads you into this, where am I with God right now kind of thing. So I'm assuming all that work has been done. Now, given that you have some sense of where you're going with the Lord, and in as much as any of us can predict the wind, in this lecture, what I want to do is to help you to think through the real content then of the rule itself, the kind of the meat of your rule of life. And I'll do so by answering three primary questions that help us to formulate what goes on in the writing of our actual rule of life. Question number one is this. Beyond my prologue, what should I cover in my rule of life? And that's something, well, what should I cover in my rule of life? Well, my answer to that question is this. Anything that your life needs ordering. Anything in your life that needs ordering. Now, Theophan the Recluse, and we've read from Theophan the Recluse before in his Path to Salvation. And I'm going to read from him again, and he writes regarding rules of life the following. Another thing that is indispensable to the resolute penitent is a rule. A rule is a specification or means, a manner and establishment of some kind of activity, be it internal or external. It provides direction and determines the entire journey, the beginning, the time, the place, the major turning points, and the end. For example, one must read. This is an ascetical activity. Ascetical activity is just something that any normal monk or human being might do. And the rules should be specific. Which books to read, when to read them, how much to read, how to prepare to read, how to begin, continue, and end the reading, what to do with what has been read. It is the same for prayer, contemplation, and other works. We can see that the rules encompass all activities and comprise their outer shell like a body. We must apply them to all our powers, all the expressions of our activities, so that no action would be taken without the application of its respective rule. Now, that's Theophan's approach. What do you cover in your rule of life? Well, absolutely everything, and every aspect of everything. When to brush your teeth, how to brush your teeth, what brand of toothbrush you use to brush your teeth, and so on and so forth. Now, my response to Theophan is it's all well and good, and I'll get to what he's trying to say in this. My first comment regarding what you should cover in the rule of life is this. Some of you should have no rule of life at all. I mentioned this earlier in the first video, and I want to remind you of that again. Some should have no rule at all. Life survival is rule of life enough. So remember that. Next, for those of you who are having some kind of rule of life, really the answer is very simple. It may sound incredibly complex from Theophan, but really the answer is simple. It's a rule of life. A rule of life. what do you do when you live? That's really the question. And I can draw some examples from traditional monastic rules. I studied a number of them over the years, and ultimately I wrote a summary of the table of contents of a number of monastic rules and covenants and agreements and these kinds of things. And they're all mostly community documents, but they cover the kinds of things that any individual human being would do when they live as well. And you can find this on my website. I've got them all documented. And so you can go take a look there and get it lengthy. I'm going to just really briefly kind of summarize the main topics that are covered in these agreements and rules and such. First of all, you're going to have the prologue that describes the aim and the chief values of this group and that kind of thing. The next thing you see, you'll also see community basics, how you treat one another, who is leadership, how counsel is made to the followership, how assemblies are governed, communication, how do we visit with other members who are outside the group at the moment, how you send letters, admission and early formation, how you screen members, what are the members' qualifications, what are their restrictions, how you grow them up. Process of early formation, recruitment, training, care of the sick in the community. What do you do about insurance? And then what if there's trouble? How do you kick someone out if there's trouble in the community? That's all under community basics. Then the next thing that most rules cover is a schedule of life. Waking, what hours we sleep, when we have prayer times, when we usually work, how do we study, and community or mission times or other sorts of times. Usually in a rule of life, you're going to find some division of time, a schedule of life. Another thing that's covered is common spiritual practices, silence or common prayers or fasting, sacraments. Another feature is private property or ownership or money. Food and drink is covered. Labor might be covered. When you do it, what kind of assignments you have, location, rotation of labor. You'll cover travel, how you travel from here to there, limits of travel for different communities, guests and socialization, how do we entertain guests, how much do we spend for entertainment, these kinds of things. Another thing that's covered often in rules of life is virtues and vices. What do we think are the chief virtues? What should we be striving after? What's characteristic of our group? That kind of a thing. Another issue is ministries. What kind of ministries we as a group are involved in. Housing arrangements, limits to housing, all these sorts of things. And then spiritual formation. Instructions about how to do spiritual formation, who's assigned to do that. So those are a list of various kinds of things that are covered in group rules of life. Now, you need not simply these will not only be covered in group rules of life, but we all do things like that. We all eat food and drink. We are all involved in work of some sort. We all travel. And so these same basic categories can not only be used to describe a community rule of life, but also be used to describe an individual rule of life. And in this lecture, I'm assuming that some of you are working on community rules of life, and some of you who are watching this are interested in making your own personal rule of life. So realize that you can cover these areas. And the question then is, well, which of these, do I cover for myself? Again, it just gets expansive, exhaustive. Well, basically, you can divide this up into three primary components. Rhythm, which is like the schedule. And some people, their life is orderly enough, they can schedule Monday is this, and Tuesday is this, and even Tuesday at 10 o'clock is this. My life has never worked that way, and so rather than detailing a schedule in that way, what I found I've had to do is say, I want this much basic time spent in prayer, this much basic time spent in study, and that kind of thing. And then at the end of the week, I calculate the hours. Now, what it may mean is that in 1 week, Tuesday seems to be the study day. And another week, it seems to be part of Wednesday and part of Thursday end up being study time. But the hours at the end of the week all calculate the same. It means I need to pay attention to my hours. But that way I can focus my priorities around the things that are important. So rhythm, that's one way of doing it, or one thing that's covered. Another basic category is what I call either the external matters or ordinary life. Food, finances, relationships, body care, whatever it seems like is really necessary for you. And the point of the matter in this, by the way, is that, and why I read that huge list, is that anything can be included in a rule of life. Your travel, your guests, your virtues, your sense of relationship with God, any of this can be covered. But, I mean, if you really want to be anal, you could go ahead and detail every single thing about every single thing. But on the other hand, I suspect that's a bit much. And my question is the Holy Spirit really leading you into all of this? This is, if you remember, about following the lead of the Holy Spirit. So the point is, look in each of these different basic categories according to your prologue, according to your sense of what is God doing in your life, and then judge, which of the rhythm elements are really important, or which of the external food, finances, relationship, body care, which of those kind of things are important for you here and now. And then there's internal. We talked in the prologue about your own personal cutting edge, where God is speaking, the vices or the virtues. You might be wanting to put on a virtue of gentleness. You might want to be struggling with a vice of worry. It might be a matter of your own spiritual edge, learning the gospel. This is a season where I really need to pour myself into learning the gospel. Or it might be a season where I really need to focus on feeling, gut feeling the sense of the love of God. Or maybe I'm struggling with trust. Name those things and figure out a way of facilitating them in your own life. So that's the question. What should I cover in my rule of life? Anything in your life that needs ordering. The second question then is this. How long do I keep this rule of life? How long do I keep this rule of life? My answer to that is this. Until you need to change it. It's as simple as that. Keep it long enough to push you beyond the, I don't feel like it today, I think I'll quit stage. You want to urge yourself, because some disciplines, some pieces of rule, you don't get the benefits until you push beyond a certain limit. That's true with physical exercise. It's true in spiritual exercises as well. So you're going to want to push yourself. But then on the other hand, you want to make it short enough so that you don't burn out trying to keep something that should have been abandoned months ago. So you'll have to see how this works. A lot of times I play with 3 months, 6 months experiments, and it's different for different elements. Over time, as you work through your rule, some things are going to feel more permanent. And there's certain times of prayer that have been in my rule of life for years and years, because I fell into something that worked and it's just stayed for a long period of time. Other things, like where I'm on my quote-unquote cutting edge, well, I'm just beginning to explore, and I need to play with different disciplines. I need to play with different attitudes or ways of doing self-examination, looking at my own trust, reflecting with a relationship about something, and that may only be for a short time. And then I'll review and revise. So different kinds of experiments will require different amounts of time. So how long do I keep this rule of life? Again, until you need to change it. It's as simple as that. And that brings us to our third and final question. How do I keep this rule of life? I mean, it's one thing to write it, and it's another thing to set out and I'll keep it for this long. But can I keep keep it this long. I've tried New Year's resolutions and they never seem to work. Well, here is my advice to that. How do I keep this rule of life? As best as you can. Again, it's as simple as that. Do your best. But you can do better than New Year's resolutions. New Year's resolution, you make some proclamation, and then you try with the hardest effort, and you try and fail. But my question is not, or my urge, is not that you just simply try to do something, but that you plan to do something. And in this planning, I have a series of 5 elements. No, 6 elements that when put together, I think help us to really plan to keep a rule of life. First of all, number 1, make your rule realistic. You're not going to keep it if it's way out of the ballpark. Now, it's true that higher goals help us reach things, and so I want to affirm the role of higher goals. But at the same time, make your rule realistic. Make it based on your prologue. In your prologue, you've given yourself a sincere and honest account of where you're at in life right now. Make your rule fit your prologue. Second, record. Realistic rule, record. Make a written document of what is your rule, and maybe say for how long you want to experiment with it, so you know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, you're never going to reach it. But if you at least have an idea of what you'd like to reach, and it's right there in front of you, you can review. You can read it every week and inspire yourself. Third, reflect. Reflect on your performance of the rule. Now, when I say reflect on your performance of the rule, I am not saying, did I do it, did I do it, did I do it? That doesn't work. It's not just did I do it. Then a rule of life becomes this vehicle of guilt. And I was teaching in Toronto last week, and I asked students for their first impressions of a rule of life. And one of the students raised his hand and said, a rule of life is something that when you don't do it, you feel guilty. Well, that's exactly what I don't want. A rule of life is a rule of life. What you want to do is reflect on how you are living life. What's going on? Where's the presence of God? Do I need to adjust something? Am I more loving now than I was before? These are the kinds of questions you want to ask. Not just questions about keeping the rule, but questions about living life. The rule should empower the life. That's the whole point. So, realistic rule, record, and then reflect. But don't reflect on just whether I kept the rule, but whether the rule is bringing life. And if not, how do I adjust the rule so that it is life-giving? Next, relationships. And I think this is one place, when you're involved in the reflection, relationships then becomes a place where it's really important. Because a good relationship can notice your blind spots. A good relationship is going to give you encouragement to the things that really matter most to you. They're going to give you support. That kind of attaboy, attagirl, you can do this kind of a thing. They're also going to provide you accountability. If you say, I'm trying to live this rule of life and I need some help, could you ask me every other week how I'm doing in X, Y, or Z in my body care, or in whether I'm gentle or not, and I'll come to you and talk about this. Then they provide that kind of ongoing supportive accountability to help you actually do the rule that you feel like embodies the sense of where God is leading you in life. So that's relationships. The next point, the 5th point, is revise. And you remember, I've said, experiment, no, play. Play. Identify how you are going to play. And this is the revise. Do it, look at it, have fun messing around with it, say, I don't think that works, I'm going to try it this way, and revise it and play. Pretend you're, building Lego blocks or something. And then finally, the sixth point is rest. Give yourself some space. It is about life. It is not about rule. The rule is an order to provide life. And so rest in the life. Relax in the love of God. And by the way, as you're doing this, I hope that you have a wonderful week.